All right, everybody, welcome to the AFC Northcast. I'm back. I'm Justin, and of course, as always, I'm joined by my two compatriots, my two brothers in arms, my frenemies, if you will, Joey and Chad. How you guys doing this week?
I'm
So far?
surviving. I'm surviving.
Yeah.
Big trust. Woo woo.
Oh God. Yep. You sound like a white dad, so it is what it is. All right, awesome. So this is going to be our review of NFL Week 11. So let's talk about it. NFL Week 11 is pretty interesting stuff. Before we get into the games, as always, we're going to get into some news. In case you're wondering, we're going to do Steelers Browns first, then we're going to do the Bengals and Raiders, and then we're going to do the Ravens and the Texans. I feel like we should kind of give you guys a heads up on where that stuff's going to be. Help you seek if you're looking for something. Chad, what are you pouring over there?
In honor of an event that we're going to spend hopefully not a lot of time talking about, I'm drinking a peach double IPA from 10 Ben's Beer called Cream Puff War. So cheers to the cream puffs.
To the cream puffs. Yeah.
It's good.
Sounds delicious. Gary says that through Facebook that Ravens should be number one in power rankings. Oh, trust me, we will get to the Baltimore Ravens, your Baltimore Ravens. But first, we're going to talk a little bit about news around the NFL. Well, not so much, I guess, around the NFL, specifically news that's pertaining to the AFC North this week, because that's kind of the more interesting stuff. The first thing I think that we wanted to get into was actually talking about Tua, right? And this is a little bit pertinent, as Chad brought up, a little bit pertinent to probably the Bengals at this point, right? Depending on what they kind of see in Ryan Finley and what they depend on doing with their team moving forward. But if you haven't heard, Tua had a dislocated hip, right? Which is kind of a problem.
And fractured.
That's right. So this is his second big injury, right? Because the first one he had a surgery not that long ago for, high ankle sprains? And the problem that I've heard about this injury, to my understanding, with the hip, is that the hip, first off, is a very loose joint, I guess medically speaking, and also it's not very vascular, so there's not a lot of blood vessels around there to kind of help with the recovery and help with a lot of blood flow to it. So people are really concerned that this is going to kind of hurt his draftability. Obviously, people were talking about how he's more of like that mobile quarterback that you want to rely on, but with the last game versus LSU, what was he threw for like 440 something yards? So maybe that might not be so much the case. But regardless, I think it's going to be at the top of everybody's list of concerns. And probably going to hurt his draftability.
Yeah, the head-to-head loss to Joe Burrow last week probably dropped him below Burrow on draft boards, just because as athletic as Burrow is, the optics of a traditional quarterback are a little bit stronger with Burrow. I think it probably drops him below Justin Herbert. I don't know I know the time frame for recovery from this is pretty long. They've already ruled him out for the season. He does have another year of eligibility, and he could choose to come back to college if he wanted to. So that'll be an interesting thing to kind of see what happens. Everybody just assumed he would come out, but this may throw a wrench in some of that. The good news about it, everybody started tossing around Bo Jackson and his career-ending hip injury just because of the nature of a hip. That type of dislocation, it is weird with blood flow and things like that. But they were able to get it reset pretty quickly. And then he had surgery like Sunday morning. So modern technology and modern medicine, a lot better than the Bo Jackson days. So
Yeah.
that bodes well for Tua, hopefully.
They're saying full recovery, which anyone that wants to get a first-round draft pick and a bunch of guaranteed money knows that you say that no matter what happened in that operating room. But yeah, certainly good news. It'll be interesting to track. And also just for the Bengals, like Tua and Joe Burrow were the kind of top tier of quarterbacks, and Herbert, I believe, was considered to be below that tier. So now instead of the first 2 draft picks being incredibly valuable, it's like just the number 1. So the Bengals like really are in a seriously prime spot right now because they either can have the guy or they can get a king's ransom for that draft pick, assuming they're able to hold on to that number 1 spot. Don't beat the Steelers this week, please, God.
Please ruin their season.
I mean, the Redskins are pretty bad. They are making a case.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they're very bad. So.
No good, very bad, terrible football teams. All right, so let's also talk about some other news.
Well, I've before we hop off the Bengals, I've got a fun little news story that I didn't plan. Have you guys heard about the Bengals fan that's sleeping on his roof?
Yeah, it was going to be a fill in the blank for me if we ever did it.
Oh, I thought about it in terms of a fill in the blank too. 42-year-old father of 2, Jeff Lanham, is a restaurant owner on the outskirts of Cincinnati. And after an 0-4 start, he told his wife that if the Bengals lost to the Cardinals, that he would sleep on the roof of their restaurant. Well, they did. And his wife, being the loving life partner that she is, went to the news with it and social media, and it became a big thing where everybody urged him to stay on the roof until the Bengals won a game.
Mm-hmm.
He agreed to that,
right? And
since has spent about 23 hours a day in a 12-foot by 10-foot rooftop tent since October 7th, the day after the still winless Bengals lost to the Cardinals. He gets meal delivered by restaurant waiters, and his wife comes by to do his laundry. According to Mr. Lanham, I'm so ready to come down. It's miserable up here. I did not plan on being up here this long. This definitely wasn't no business move. I can tell you that. The only reason I'm even up here is to silence the haters' mouths. I never want anyone to be able to say I wasn't a man of my word.
Yeah.
What do they say about those people who don't study history? They're doomed to repeat it. Because in 1991, a radio personality in Cincinnati named Dennis Wildman Walker said that he would live on a billboard until the Bengals won a game. And he spent 2 months living on the walkway at the bottom of a billboard when they started 0-8. And that's what you get when you don't know your history. Repeat it, Jeff Lanham.
You know, also within recent history as well, the 1-15 Browns, former head coach Hugh Jackson said, "Hey, look, there's no way we're gonna do worse next year. If we do worse next year, you'll see me in that river." Lake. Excuse me. But yeah, man. So, like you said, people are doomed to repeat history.
And according to the Washington Post, the Bengals have only a 9% chance of becoming the 6th team in league history to finish the season without a win.
I mean, 9% is like a pretty good chance in terms of going winless.
He said that if they go winless, he'll move back in with his family at the end of the season and return to the roof at the beginning of the regular season next year.
I mean, hey, man. Good for him, man. Someone needs to start like a GoFundMe or like a Patreon for that motherfucker.
Yeah.
Jeez, man.
Yeah, it's not like Cincinnati's that warm this time of year.
No. Oh, no. Not at all. I mean, it's not Cleveland, but it's definitely fucking
He's
cold.
Got like a heater, like a little space heater, and a television, and like a cot in his tent. That's it.
And it ain't getting any fucking warmer.
No.
Oh, man. All right, well, let's move on to some other news, which will kind of segue into the game as well. So there's a little bit of Browns news going on. The first thing that I want to talk about is Antonio Callaway was just straight up cut from the team, dropped completely, which was kind of shocking and interesting. So the week before, he had been benched because he was like 10 minutes late or something like that. I don't remember the time frame, but he was late to show up for to the game, basically. And this week, I don't know. I've heard that there's suspicions of like drug allegations or something like that, or some other substance problems. But yeah, man, the Browns just said fuck it and dropped him, which I'm actually a huge fan of. We talked a little bit about the culture and the coaching and things that have been going on with the Browns, but I think this sets like that good precedent, that good precedent of like, look, we're not fucking around. So I don't know. I'm a fan of it. Callaway was overrated. Last year, he was not that productive, and people said he was like the greatest thing since fucking sliced bread, and he's going to develop. And we've seen him this year, and he just really hadn't developed very much. So, maybe another team will pick him up, if these allegations or whatever it is goes away. But I really wasn't that crazy about Callaway to begin with, and I'm still waiting for Rashard Higgins to be introduced as a starter in the lineup. But, we all know our sentiment on that.
Yeah, I think I like it. But the problem is that this whole situation has just been so flubbed around with from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, I'm not sure if I can believe they know what they're doing anymore. It's like they keep him in the starting lineup after the suspension. He keeps not playing good. They leave him in the starting lineup. Then they bench him 10 minutes before the game. Then he's not even on the sideline for the game. Then they just cut him. It's like, do you guys really have a plan? Like, do you have a plan?
Well, I think people get opportunities and give chances and get chances, and eventually, the straw breaks, right? Or I'm sorry, the camel's back breaks. Excuse me.
It's just the timing,
Right.
It's just like, the way it happens. It always just feels weird. Like, why was he in a box watching the game when he warmed up on the field? Like, why? Just like everything about it just is It's just so weird. And then Higgins is still not even like a major role in the offense. It's just like, I kind of just feel like they're idiots, and I'm not just saying that because you beat me and I'm bitter. Like, it just feels all janky, like they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, and another thing I'll say too is it's really unfortunate that it happened just after the trade deadline, because I really think that the Browns could have fooled somebody into getting something for him.
Yes.
I think I agree with the move, cutting him. I guess it's a good move. But I'm not ready to applaud it. It's not like he was bringing, other than his draft position 2 years ago, he doesn't have value to this football team, really. Not that he's displayed over the last couple years.
Yeah.
So
I mean, yeah, not yet. So I don't know.
It's cool if Freddie wants this to be his I'm making a stand and I'm gonna be
right.
a disciplinarian coach, but it's kind of toothless to me.
I don't know. I mean, Freddie is, I think at least most people kind of tend to forget that he was a Parcells guy, right? A Bill Parcells guy. So, and there was talk in the season at some point where he kind of called Parcells and asked him for some advice, and some things happened, and they talked about penalties and other stuff, right? But yeah, so I think that hard line kind of a move, and if that's the mentality and that's the way he wants to go, look, I'm all for it, man. I mean, Joey, I don't know about you, but from being in the military, I'm all about hard line, man. Fuck you. You have an opportunity, you either take it or leave it. All right. So, but it is what it is. Some other notable changes to the Browns roster. Morgan Burnett, torn Achilles. He's done for the season pretty much. I know that Chad had kind of joked him a little bit earlier on in the season, but I think he'd been playing pretty well as a safety. Last game he had an interception. Now it was tipped from Denzel Ward, which we'll get more into the game details in a second. But I think he was still valuable to the team, and I think it's with the problems that the Browns have been having at safety, as far as keeping people healthy, it is definitely an impact that's notable.
I didn't joke him that much. Look, I said
Fair.
that he got injured early for the Steelers and then never was able to work his way back into the starting lineup. And he got injured. So, look, I don't cheer for injuries. I wasn't happy to see it happen. But if you want to talk about who predicted the future, it would be me. Not bragging or anything.
Yeah, I mean, nobody likes the I told you so guy, but I told you so.
Bingo.
So.
I'm not here to get liked by Browns fans. So I told you so.
Hell
fair.
Yeah.
They look fair. Well, apparently we don't need your likes, as it turns out.
Do you need a strong safety, though? Because last I heard, you don't actually have any. Not even one on the roster right now.
We're working on it. But the last thing to talk about is obviously the big elephant. And if you've been keeping a pulse in the NFL, you probably have been hearing, nothing but this. So I don't think we're going to spend too much time and too much detail on it, but we'll kind of go over at least our opinions on what happened, why it happened, if we agree with the punishments, and, I guess what we think moving forward, right? But if you don't know, there was the striking image of Myles Garrett striking Mason Rudolph in the head with Mason Rudolph's own helmet, right? It is, and I'm just going to put this out there. So first off, I'm going to start it off by saying, even as a Browns fan, obviously, that's not something that you would condone or justify or anything like that, right? And I just want to make this very clear that this is not I'm not at any point am I trying to say that it is okay or acceptable for Myles Garrett to hit someone in the head with a helmet, let alone their own helmet, right? And more specifically, when that person's helmet is removed, they have no protection on their head, right? However, one aspect of what happened that I am personally a little bit disappointed about, and I was surprised to see that people share my sentiment, is that Mason Rudolph has not also received any punishment at all, because it's very clear as people, I think we were talking about it the very next morning. I was like, hey man, Mason Rudolph started this. And again, it does not make it acceptable what Myles Garrett did. But the fact that Mason Rudolph kind of came off scot-free is, I think it sets a bad tone. And even more towards that, in the interviews that he had directly after the game, he kind of shrugged it off, oh yeah, he's a dirty player. And he didn't say those words, but that's the sentiment you kind of got from it, is that he was kind of saying Myles was a dirty guy or whatever, and it felt very just fucking childish and kind of just look, man, own up and to something. I don't know.
He called him a bully too.
Yeah, I called him a bully. He said it was very Bush League, I think, is the thing that everyone keeps talking about. And so that, to me, I would say is a little unjust, but I'm not going to throw my arms up and say this is fucking bullshit and blah, blah, blah. I just think that it doesn't surprise me, but it's at the same time, it's a little disappointing that he doesn't, that Mason Rudolph, I guess you can say, kind of got away with it, if you will. If getting hit in the head with a helmet is getting away with it, right? But that it should show a precedent that, look, even as a quarterback, you can't fucking start shit like that. Won't be no shit, you don't start no shit, right? So I don't know.
Well, he's going to get fined. They're about to levy a dozen fines on all
everybody, right?
Benches, and we're involved. Mason's going to get fined.
Right, but I mean, everybody's getting fined, So is there really much of a precedent that's getting set different from him and just somebody that came off the bench?
People that fight in piles don't get suspended, right? So here's the suspensions. You got Myles Garrett is suspended for the rest of the season / indefinitely, but from everything I'm hearing, it's going to end up being just the season.
Well, yeah, they just filed the appeal last week or something.
Yeah, so the appeal they're saying is you can't be suspended indefinitely for something that happens on the field. So they're probably going to have to change the suspension, and it's likely that they'll change it just this season. So that was for hitting a dude in the head with a club. Club is a helmet. Marquise Pouncey is suspended. He's the center for the Steelers for 3 games for punching and kicking Myles Garrett on the ground. That's a pretty standard suspendable type of act, even though almost every Steeler fan in the world is totally behind the actions, and probably some neutral fans too. You protect your quarterback. That's just what you do.
I mean,
Marquise Pouncey drinks for free in Pittsburgh for the rest of his life.
Not even just protect your quarterback, but a human being, right? That was the way that it kind of played out. I mean, yeah, you gotta.
So I would have liked to see him be suspended for less, but when you kick a person,
I would disagree,
but really land the blow, that's part of it. So that's fine. He's suspended for 3 games.
Notable, he was suspended once for each punch, but 0 times for each kick.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm just being a dick. Whatever. There's 3 punches and 1 kick. Whatever. Anyways, go ahead. Sorry.
And then Larry Ogunjobi, who, depending on how much time you give me, I will spend a lot of time railing against for the rest of the time I'm on this podcast today and in the future.
Mm-hmm.
was suspended for 1 game for hitting Mason Rudolph from behind
Shoving.
after. I mean, he hit him. Like, he hit him to the ground from behind.
I mean, he fell
So
to the
that
ground.
was the 1 game suspension, right?
Right.
So we can debate. I don't think we want to spend a lot of time on
No.
it. Who started the fracas? Did Myles Garrett sack him late? Was it an unnecessary hit? And then obviously Mason Rudolph was pulling at his helmet and kicked him. None of that stuff gets suspended. Like, you just don't get suspended for fighting in a pile in the NFL. So, like, yes, he was part of it and he's going to get fined, but you just don't get suspended for that sort of stuff in the NFL. So if he does, he's actually going to get suspended for Myles Garrett's bad decision.
I think so. There's a couple times where everything could have just ended. The first time everything could have just ended is if Myles Garrett just chucked Mason Rudolph's helmet after he took it off.
Yeah, the
Tomahawk Show covered this very, very well, very thoroughly. Another time it could have. So Mason Rudolph did not have to pursue Myles Garrett after. So Mason Rudolph had a hand very clearly. Yes, CJ, we're talking about this situation.
We're breezing over it.
Mason Rudolph had a hand in the continuation of what this became after fighting in the pile, whatever we want to call that. I'm not trying to victim blame or anything like that, but there is a little bit in me of the don't start none, won't be none. Like, hey man, are you gonna fight Myles Garrett?
Right.
Really?
Right.
Like, even if he's not blasting you in the head with a helmet, like what are you gonna? You're just gonna play the tough guy and get in his face? Like,
Well, then and then immediately when something happens, go, oh, what the hell?
Then he called Larry Ogunjobi a bitch after
Right.
Larry Ogunjobi blindsided him and knocked him to the ground. But so
He is,
I mean,
and he is. So
it was a bitch move. Yeah,
Mason
it
Rudolph
was.
understands human character.
Mason Rudolph just comes across to me as
A spoiled rich white kid.
yes, like
Yes.
a spoiled, like affluent,
Right.
entitled, like an entitled kid,
Right.
to me. Like, he had a hand. Myles Garrett did not seek him out after taking his helmet off to hit him with it. Like, it was the other way around. Mason Rudolph decided to continue the confrontation. Myles Garrett was being handled by 2 offensive linemen.
Yeah, notable also, David DeCastro deserves like a fucking medal. Was it him or Villanueva that was a Ranger?
The freaking patience, man. It was Villanueva.
Okay, yeah, but still, DeCastro, yeah, the patience and the forbearing and the foresight to say like even after the helmet hit, like, I'm just gonna lay on top of him. I mean, I don't know what his mentality was, but not only so that Myles can kind of not do anything, but that nobody can also get to him too. Is at least the way that I see it, is like, just like, let's fucking pacify this. Yeah, that was very, like, just. It was, I don't want to say mature because, like, I don't know, he obviously is a mature grown man, so it was just, I don't know. It was very honorable.
Can we talk about some of the things on the periphery of this?
Yeah.
Like, how 3 weeks ago... Go ahead.
Does anybody have any more piece to say about Myles, fucking Mason, Ogunjobi, Pouncey, whatever? Anything else that anybody feels they need to air out about it? Or can we move on?
I think I'm fine with moving on.
I'm good to move on.
Okay.
Are you?
Yeah. The one thing I want to add actually is that Myles is typically, like, and you've probably heard about it, and as someone who's followed the Browns a lot, he's very articulate, he's very intelligent, he's not like this fucking, I don't want to use the word thug because it doesn't feel appropriate, right? But he's not somebody that's known for being a violent individual, other than obviously right on the field, violently sacking quarterbacks. So it was very. Everyone has been surprised at how uncharacteristic it is of him, and I think will probably play into the results of everything that happens. And that's why I think a lot of people were so surprised, at least people that are fans of Myles Garrett and fans of the Browns.
Yeah, I mean, he's like a
superhero.
Poet. He's like a Dragon Ball Z nerd,
Right.
and he writes poetry and plays piano. And off the field, I think before all this happened, off the field, most people in the NFL would consider him, classify him as like a gentle giant type of person. And playing into that was a few weeks ago when some rando punched him in his car.
Yeah.
And he
was just like,
he did not retaliate towards said random person. And of course, you're in a different frame of mind. And that's another thing that kind of bothers me about all this is, so this year in the preseason, somebody took somebody's helmet off and hit them with their own helmet. And the guy got suspended for 2 preseason games and a regular season game. So part of this whole punishment is the optics and the NFL reacting to this was the only game that was on. So
primetime
everyone
game,
was watching it. Everyone had all day Friday to talk about nothing but this.
Right.
So it's not an unprecedented thing.
They were talking on the radio about, was it like a couple years ago, someone from the Titans like stomped on someone's face with their cleats.
Albert Ainsworth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like these kinds of things are not, obviously they're not acceptable and of the norm, but they're not that like, I don't know.
I mean, that was like 10 years ago. So it's like,
right, but does that make it any better? Right. So the suspension was different. Actually, what I thought was really interesting too is that Max Kellerman pointed out that hitting someone with their own helmet is actually in the rule book apparently. And it's just like a 10-yard penalty or something stupid like that. Obviously it's probably super antiquated and super like, something that people have looked over, like, I don't know, but I just thought that was interesting. All right, sorry.
Can I bring some light to the situation?
Sure.
All right.
And then we'll be done unless Chad has something to say, because Chad hasn't really had a chance to respond recently. Do you have
Vince Williams, the day after when all the suspensions came down, tweeted, "If Marquise Pouncey jumps off a bridge, I'm jumping. I'll find out why on the way down." So that's the type of leader and respect that Marquise Pouncey has in that locker room. And then another fun thing that happened is this week, The Athletic released an article on Vontaze Burfict, where Vontaze Burfict gave some quotes. So one of the contingencies for Myles' suspension ending is that he has to have a face-to-face meeting with Roger Goodell. And Vontaze Burfict has a quote about meeting Roger Goodell. He said,
wait.
It's better than you could even imagine. I met Roger Goodell in New York, and he was a total bitch. He was a bitch. He didn't let anybody speak. He rushed us in and out of the meeting. The meeting was bullshit. I mean, that pretty much just confirms everything that I imagine about Roger Goodell.
Yeah.
But from the words of modern American philosopher, Vontaze Burfict.
Nice. But so you said you wanted to talk about some stuff leading up to, Joey.
I'm going to respond.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
We're about to talk about the actual happenings of this game. And early on in the game, they cited a statistic that in his career, Mike Tomlin had won 20 games, lost 3, and tied 1 versus the Browns. And the statistic struck me because I had spoken a lot on this podcast and to anyone that I talked to about football about how excited I was that the Browns were maybe going to be good and that we might renew a very old rivalry that hadn't really existed in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me in the first quarter of this game that basically nothing could happen that could renew this rivalry during the course of this game. Like, and then it did. It just did.
It didn't until it did.
And we'll talk more about some of the other stuff probably because I'll bring it up if you don't. But everyone has handled the aftermath of this event very professionally, almost to the point where I started wondering if the rivalry, aside from the fans, really will heat up. And then I remembered the earlier parts of the game when two Steeler players were knocked out of the game and there's been multiple reports of like Browns players celebrating all of these events on the sidelines as they were happening. And it occurred to me that this rivalry is very much for the players, for the fans, and for everybody. So it's on.
Yeah.
It's on like Donkey Kong now.
I think one part of that though is so the Steelers having the historical upper hand in the rivalry. A lot of the pleasure that was taken in some of the misfortune of others was on the Brown side. They had one shot of Greedy like immediately after someone got knocked the fuck out with like the biggest smile you've ever seen, and he wasn't even interacting with anybody else. He was just happy. But also there's like an aspect to it, and you get it a lot from some of like the Pats probably don't consider any of the other teams in their division much of a rivalry anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But those other teams in their division fucking hate the Patriots, and there's a little bit of that still. Granted, the Browns did win, so that gives this rivalry a little more juice, having it not be so lopsided. But there's a little bit of that where the Browns, like, you may have gone into this game saying nothing that happens in this game can perpetuate the rivalry. The Browns came into this game in fucking rivalry mode. Like, it was already there for them because they are in the little brother role, if there is one in the rivalry.
That's true. Well, now it's both ways.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so obviously, like we said before, we're not going to root for injuries or anything like that, or we're not like, I mean, these are still human beings with livelihoods and, you know, families, right? Obviously. However, I am most certainly still fired up that there's going to be like real like hatred towards the teams in the AFC North again. It's like one of those things, and I remember my brother was talking about it like last year, and he's like, man, like the rivalries in the NFL just kind of aren't the same anymore, especially with like ever since free agency kind of happened. You know, teams kind of go back and forth, players go back and forth, you know, everyone's just kind of knows that they're there for their game check. I mean, obviously not just their game check, right? But it's really kind of changed. You know, people used to be out for fucking blood for the other team. And I'm excited that there's actually going to be a little bit of emotion that the game, a little bit more emotion that the game is played with against the AFC North teams. So
yeah, it's a good time to be in those types of rivalries.
Yeah,
Chad and I have enjoyed one for the better part of 2 decades now.
Yeah.
And the Ravens play a weird role in the interdivisional rivalries now because this team that the Ravens have now feels so
second level,
like happy. No. Regardless of like talent level,
right.
Like there's no like mean, boisterous like enforcer.
Yeah,
and I'm sure the first time
murderer.
Like somebody cheap shots Lamar or something like that, like
it's on. Like
the demeanor will change, but right now they're just like a happy-go-lucky, like lighthearted group,
right
at the moment.
Yeah, so let's roll into the game. So speaking of the Ravens, also apparently this is like the first time in I don't remember how many years, like 20 years or something, that since that they've been
franchise
back.
History.
Yeah, so yeah, franchise history. Air quotes. That the Browns,
since the Browns are an expansion team.
That's true. I know. Whatever. I get it. All right. That they've beaten the Ravens and the Steelers in the same season, which like hearing that stat kind of blew my mind, but at the same time I was kind of like, oh yeah, like, which makes the victory all that more sweet. So I think that this game is kind of a tale of two halves, if you ask me, to be completely honest with you. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about the first half first. The offense obviously started to get a step, and they played fucking fantastic, right? Kareem Hunt had some fantastic catches. I think Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb being in the same team together, someone had God, I don't remember who it was, but someone had likened it kind of to the Kamara and Ingram kind of dynamic that happened in New Orleans the last couple of years, and I think that that's a good kind of comparison, right? Obviously, I think they're a little bit different in their styles. We're not getting the carbon copy of Kamara and Ingram, but it still kind of has that dynamic where the offense can run through those two guys and be extremely successful, and then still take advantage of that, being able to have some deep threats, right? Having Jarvis Landry be an over-the-middle possession kind of guy, and then having the ability for, hopefully, chemistry to develop with Odell Beckham Jr. And I think that's really the tale of how things kind of went in the first half. The Steelers' defense is really good and has been really good, but the Browns, yeah, man, they were out for blood as far as the offense. Well, first off, the offense goes. So, yeah, I mean, most of the game went through Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb had like 27 attempts or something. Yeah, 27 attempts for 92 yards, which Nick Chubb was also the first player in the NFL, or excuse me, the first running back in the NFL to reach 1,000 yards. So that was rushing. That's pretty interesting. That's pretty fun. But yeah, man, the offense, I think, is starting to form an identity by going through Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt simultaneously. And that's probably the most important thing to take away, is that they can go through the two of them, and then Baker, when given the opportunity, can make some pretty dynamic throws out to like Cardell Hodges for 41 yards or whatever. He can make some decent throws to Odell Beckham. Some decent deep throws. So even though Beckham still was 4 for 10 in this game, 40%. I think that's his. No, it's surprisingly not his lowest this season, but yeah.
Yeah, Hunt seems to have been a real game changer for them on this offense. It's scary. Hunt and Chubb back there in a pistol with OBJ and Jarvis on the field. As much as the passing game's kind of still been a little disjointed, Hunt's been great in the 2 games that he's played.
Yeah.
So, Chad, first half.
Oh, are you muted?
Yeah, I was muted. I had to make a couple logistical adjustments.
Fair.
I didn't really write my notes based on time of things that happened.
That's fine.
But most of what I thought the Browns did successfully was in the first half. So if I'm going to say nice things about how they played, it basically bears on the first half, primarily for the offense. I thought Baker had, by all the percentages, his best game navigating the pocket. He extended plays. I will say, from like a, we beat ourselves standpoint or whatever, I was a little disappointed at how poorly the Steelers navigated him drifting to the right. An amateur podcast of 3 guys with completely other jobs knew that Baker Mayfield likes to drift to the right. So it was unfortunate that he had so much success doing that against professionals that make millions of dollars in a billion-dollar industry. But he did do it, and he didn't always do it. He did just step up in the pocket a few times really nicely. So overall, I just want to compliment Baker. I had said in the previous podcast that I thought leaving Minka as a single high safety would probably be acceptable, even against these 2 very talented receivers that the Browns have. And on the first drive of the game, they caught Odell in single coverage with Stevie Nelson for like a 40-yard game. And I actually wasn't even going to watch the coach's tape on this, but I had to see at least that play. So I did. I watched Mason Rudolph's 4 interceptions, and I watched this play. And it was a really weird coverage, and I don't want to dwell too much details, but they actually had an extra defensive back. And it was Mike Hilton. Mike Hilton drifted into the flat where Odell started, and no one was there. And then Stevie Nelson had Odell, and Minka Fitzpatrick picked up Jarvis Landry on a deep crossing route, which is why there was no deep safety. So great read, great play call. I don't know what the Steelers exactly were doing on that play, but it didn't work. So that was excellent. And then Kareem Hunt, yeah, he awesome check down, great hands. I didn't really find him to be that much of a threat in the running game, but on third down, when he drifts out of the backfield, they just didn't really have an answer for it. So I would say after 2 weeks, very successful integration into the offense from a Mr. Kareem Hunt.
Yeah. Something that kind of surprised me about the Steelers' defense is we all know how dynamic and how good their pass rush is, but T.J. Watt was taken care of for most of the game. I'll say that much. Baker got sacked. He only got sacked one time. That's right. So, with the offensive line kind of having the troubles that they've been having, the Browns, they did elevate Drew Forbes in the offensive line this week. He finally came off of IR, which, I don't know. Maybe that made a big difference. I don't know. But I think, obviously, like you said, Baker was able to navigate the pocket a little bit better. Maybe that's because the offensive line, he had a little more confidence in what was going on, and the pass rush just wasn't that successful with the Steelers.
That would not be my assessment. I think that Watt was getting around the tackle pretty well, but they were doing just enough. And Baker was leaving the pocket or like getting around. So I would credit Baker more than the offensive line with Watt in particular. I thought Watt was winning his matchup, but maybe in an undisciplined way, especially in the second half when it had already been proven that Baker was going to make adjustments. Get out of there.
So CJ asks if it's a knock on the Browns that they only won by 2 scores, even though they kind of controlled the whole game. What do you guys think?
No, I think it's a division rivalry. You take a 2-score win at home. This is basically the same team that took the Ravens to the brink of a tie and overtime and all that jazz in Pittsburgh a few weeks ago. So,
yeah, I think that would be forgetting the game flow, which was that the Steelers were down by 1 score with the ball multiple times and were pretty close to actually taking this game at moments before kind of Mason sort of imploded or the Browns defense stepped up or however you want to put it. So no, I think a 2-score win over the Steelers for the Browns. If this Miles stuff didn't happen, it would just be celebration in the streets. They just won the game. They won at almost every level. They were a better team, and why would you ever complain about that?
Right. Two other things I wanted to point out. Number one is that Seibert missed 2 field goals, which were like his first 2 this entire season. One of them was a rookie long attempt, but it was only like 51 yards or something like that. I don't remember. It was like 50.
The other was like 48. Right?
Yeah, 48 or something like that, right? So they weren't necessarily the closest, but they were the first ones that he's actually missed. And those could have been opportunities. I mean, who knows? The other thing I like to point out is something that I just always kind of harp on is, you are as good, I guess, as your opponent. And the Steelers defense is like the number 4 defense or something like that, right? Steelers defense is really good, and they've only improved since Minka Fitzpatrick has come onto the team. So the fact that they won by only, I guess, two scores, with both those factors considering, I will say as a Browns fan, I'm pretty happy with. But again, remember also that most of those big plays and those chunks were in the first half. The missed field goals, so obviously the field progression and ability to march down the field, all that stuff was in the first half, right? And then we'll talk about the second half, I guess, when we get towards that.
Yeah, I mean, CJ brings up that eventually the Steelers became depleted.
Yeah.
This whole game got weird in the second half because the Browns lost Morgan Burnett and Demarius Randall to injury and ejection. And then the Steelers, who the receivers were not doing Mason any favors early, just more drops everywhere. And then they lose Juju and Deontay. And
James Conner.
That's when things really started to unravel for Mason at the end of the game, was when he was out there with a bunch of guys that, I don't know what you expect him to do.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously towards the end of games, things kind of start to get a little soft, which I'm not going to say that's the only reason why the Steelers had a touchdown or anything like that, because that's absurd. But I think it's fair to say that you start kind of going into prevent mode. and then one or two things kind of slips by you. So what I want to get into is the second half, which I actually want to compliment the Steelers for, and it's something that I almost feel like is like my catchphrase now. Like good teams can be up at the half, but great teams will come back, right? And while the Steelers didn't necessarily come back, the defense certainly did. The defense on the Steelers in the second half made the adjustments that were necessary to pretty much shut the Browns down for the entire second half. Which is why I kind of wanted to call it like a tale of two halves. And then to the negative of the Browns, their inability to adjust or change up their game plan enough to throw the defense off a little bit. So, that's kind of the difference between the fact that the Steelers team on defense is really good, cohesive unit that can game plan, and the Browns offense is still kind of trying to find an identity.
Yeah, I didn't have like a lot of very specific notes about the Steelers D in the second half.
Yeah, they just kind of shut them down.
Well, the Steelers' run defense, I think, is up now. I think part of it is that they've improved as the year's gone on, and part of it, I don't know, maybe just statistically they don't stand out a ton, but like they have a great run defense, but they were down by 2 scores, so the Browns were incentivized to run even more than normal. And it's basically helps the Steelers out doing that. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really know besides that why the Steelers D played better in the second half necessarily. I think even in the first half it was like a big play here or there, like that's why I highlighted that big deep pass to OBJ, because the Steelers haven't given up big pass plays since Minka's been in the fold, and I was like, what the heck happened? And it was a low scoring game, like when you come down to it. So like that's like half the game right there, just that big play that leads to a big touchdown. We'll see if they can recover defensively. I mean, all their injuries are on offense, so that's most of what my notes come down to in terms of the Steelers and how they tried to struggle back into the game and couldn't really do it. I would not blame the receivers for Mason Rudolph's play in this game. I know that I'm probably the only guy in the maybe world that's saying nice things about Mason Rudolph over the last month. I think it's pretty clear that he hasn't been improving over the last couple weeks. I think it's a very big ask to take a definitely below average quarterback, take away his number one running, his arguably number 2 running back who's been out for the last 2 weeks, his number 1 receiver, and his number 2 receiver. Like, I mean, it's just a huge deal. That being said, if you'll allow it, I want to talk briefly about Mason's 4 interceptions.
I'll allow it.
The first one was a flea flicker, and Mason threw what I would argue is an imperfect ball. He had room towards the sideline to throw, but it was a pretty well placed ball that would have hit his receiver in stride. And I believe it was it Ward that made a deflection on that pass, jumped up, one-handed deflection.
Denzel Ward made the deflection. Morgan Burnett caught it.
Really nice defensive play on the deflection, and Morgan Burnett did his job being there. So I'm not going to really get worked up about Mason. It's probably one of his better deep balls that he's thrown, frankly. Second one was that the crossing route that Joe Schobert kind of jumped in front of?
To the left side.
Yeah. So that was a crossing route, and that is a topic that we've covered in this podcast. Chad wanted to see Mason Rudolph throw in stride on deep crossing routes, and Mason did not do that. He threw behind his receiver. Joe Schobert closed on the route and made a nice interception. So, strike one, Mason. We wanted to see improvement there, and we didn't. And that's not your receiver's fault. He's running, you hit him. Obviously, timing helps when you have repetition and practice, but you got to make the play. Third interception. I think this is the one. Yeah, this one was terrible. And by the way, credit to Joe Schobert. We're going to talk more about him, obviously. But on that second interception, he got way back in his zone coverage. We've talked about Joey's Ravens middle linebackers struggling to get like deep enough in zone coverage. Joe Schobert was like 20 yards back, and he started like 4 yards behind the line of scrimmage. Like he really got great depth on that coverage. So credit to him for being available play, which would have just been an incomplete pass. Then Joe Schobert drops. Mason Rudolph just never sees him. This is classic bad rookie quarterback stuff. Joe Schobert is like an invisible man, throws it right to him. Mason, strike 2. And then Mason needed to make the throw that I've been saying Lamar cannot make all year. We're talking about Lamar Jackson now. He tried to throw it over the linebacker and in front of the safety into a window. Classic NFL throw. It's a throw that if you have a big-time quarterback, you want him to be able to make. And he just couldn't. He got it over the linebacker, too high. Safety intercepted it. And so it's just like Mason not making an NFL throw. The reason that I'm going to give Mason a strike here is on re-watching this play, he stared, I think it was James Washington, down the whole way. So instead of having like a relatively window to throw that in, there are actually 3 Browns defenders converging in there, making the throw much more difficult because he wasn't progressing. So I've been saying that Mason Rudolph goes through his progressions this year on this podcast. And I think he does. But if you really are watching closely, I think what's happening is he's just slow. He's making his progressions, but he's just not quick enough. On the 4th and 1 play, he actually had a receiver, Holton, probably open for a touchdown, but he didn't get to him on that read until late, and then it was deflected by a defensive lineman because he had already been running across the field for like a year wide open. There's a lot I don't like about that play, including Mike Tomlin's calling a timeout beforehand, but Mason's got to make his reads faster, and he's got about 1.5 months to get better at it before he's back to being a backup quarterback for the rest of his life.
The last thing I want to bring up is this Browns defense. So obviously, you kind of touched on it with talking about the interceptions for Mason Rudolph. However, as good as the Browns defense played, I think it is notable, like you said, to say how good they played against a very banged up and down on the deep on the roster Steelers offense, and the fact that the Browns had 106 yards in penalties on defense. That's huge. That's a lot of yards, right? And any other team in the NFL, maybe not any, but most teams in the NFL would have capitalized off of that heartily. So, it is what it is. The Browns need to really clean that shit up. Denzel Ward has been getting super handsy on the receivers, and I'm not comfortable with it. Joey says all the good DBs always are, but it just makes me really uncomfortable, man, especially when he's giving up, 40 yards a chunk on pass interference calls. So,
yeah, I think I know how you feel about it, and I guess I just fundamentally disagree. I think you got to. It's the only way these guys stand a chance most of the time
nowadays,
with all the rules and things like that for them, and they can't call it on them every time.
Yeah.
Jimmy Smith knows, or Marlon Humphrey, whoever assaulted
DeAndre Hopkins, Marlon Humphrey, I think it was.
Sunday.
Yeah, that was terrible. And if you look at the flow of the game, there was the 100 yards of penalties. I mentioned this in the preview podcast. Like the Steelers' offense, not great, is the nicest way to put it right now, especially moving the ball on lengthy drives. So like they either needed turnovers or penalties to shorten the field for them, and their one touchdown came when they got a very shortened field by a pass interference and I think another defensive penalty. Yeah. So on one hand, you can say, damn it, Browns, don't do that. But on the other hand, you can say, well, they only did it for one drive. And if you only give up one good drive in a game, you're probably going to win.
Fair. But let's move on. We've talked enough about Browns and Steelers, and they do meet again in 2 weeks, so we still got plenty of gas to let out on that one.
One more point, and we can talk about this a little on Thursday too, but before the incident, Myles Garrett had an absolutely monster game. So from a football standpoint, we're talking about a guy who took a Pro Bowl left tackle and made him look like an idiot from the first snap all the way to the end. Alejandro Villanueva had 2 holding penalties in the first 15 minutes of the game. He was beaten soundly every way that Myles Garrett wanted all game. This could have been a potential AFC North Player of the Week type of performance. And beyond that, just looking to the future, like how do you scheme without having him going forward, because he's so disruptive.
Especially if Olivier Vernon's still out.
Yeah, so fantastic football presence all the way up till the very end of the game from Myles Garrett. He really, really stood out, dominated Alejandro Villanueva.
All right, let's move on over to the Bengals and the Raiders. So, yeah, this was a stinker, man. It was interesting because within like the first quarter, it looked like the Bengals were like getting some offensive like clicking going on. They ended up like in the red zone like a couple of times, and it looked like, oh, maybe they're kind of figuring things out, and then it just turned into a fucking clunker, man. It was kind of a stinker. Ryan Finley had a total of 115 yards passing with a 41.94% completion rate. Now, I mean, obviously, as effectively, right, as a rookie, I mean, it is what it is, but that is not a good look, especially. And again, you know, he has a really bad offensive line. He got sacked 5 times as a result. But yeah, not looking very good.
Yeah, the game finished 17-10. It started off pretty quick with 2 early touchdowns from each offense. Both featured really run-heavy attacks where both running backs made the opposing defenses look like they forgot how football was played for the last 50 years. I really was impressed by Mixon specifically. He was running with power. He was elusive. He was getting to the edge quickly. And then if he couldn't, sidestep a guy, he was just driving him backwards to get out of bounds. His run to score the touchdown, it was Barry Sanders-esque. Supposed to be a sweep to the right. It was all muddled up, and he just like swooped back to the left and made it work. It was awesome. We talked about this a little bit leading up to the game. The Bengal linebackers aren't good, and the Raiders' best skill players are the types of people that linebackers are paying attention to. Darren Waller, their tight end, and Josh Jacobs, their rookie running back. So who to thunk it? Darren Waller was getting all sorts of catches all game and all yardage after the catch and just dominating. Not to mention Hunter Renfrow running in the kind of intermediate middle of the field where you might see a linebacker in zone creeping around, just getting tons of yards after the catch. And Josh Jacobs had a great game, controlling the clock, moving the chains, all the stuff running backs do. So, you can't be that surprised that the Raiders were able to kind of control the tempo and end up squeaking this one out.
Yeah, I was actually kind of honestly surprised by the flow of the game that the Raiders weren't able to score more. I think the Raiders have been an underdog kind of this year in the sense that people have had very low expectations based off of the things that have kind of happened in the offseason, things that happened during Hard Knocks and even the beginning of the season. But they really have kind of overperformed, I think, from what people have expected. But in this game against the Bengals, I think they severely underperformed. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the offense... Sorry, go, Joey, if you want to jump in.
You're good.
Okay. Well, the other thing that I asked for the preview episode was, where is my Bengals defensive line? Where the heck are these guys?
Yeah.
And you know what? I started a defensive line sack alert. Nope. We got one from Dunlap. We got one from Geno Atkins. And we got one from Carl Lawson. So they were disruptive. The defensive line was active in this game. Derek Carr mostly looked good, but it wasn't comfortable for him. They were giving pressure, and also I think that the Bengals secondary was a little bit opportunistic. Jesse Bates finally had a positive play in coverage instead of just tackling like a linebacker. He jumped a route for Hunter Renfrow and made a nice interception. So, I think the Bengals defense played with a little more spunk than usual today, and
Fair.
their talent, kind of stood out at just when they needed to a little bit, keep it close.
You know what I've been thinking about a little bit this week, or these last 2 weeks actually, is everyone's talking about how tank for Tua and stuff like that, particularly with the big teams that are really hurting at quarterback. But you have the Bengals who have Andy Dalton, which I think most of us can agree is a pretty good gamble, right? Moving forward, still even. Obviously, they didn't trade him, and they had opportunities. And then Ryan Finley, if he was to, let's say, turn out to be something special, would they pick up a quarterback? But, there's a defensive lineman that everyone's been talking about a lot this year too, isn't there? So I was thinking, what if they drafted again just to bolster that defensive line to make it just that much more relentless? I think that would be kind of interesting, as much as obviously they need to trade away their number one pick for a fucking offensive lineman or something. But,
I mean, for as relentless as this defensive line is supposed to be, Josh Jacobs, rookie running back, just made them look like little boys out there.
Yeah. But that's the one thing that we've always talked about with the Bengals too, is that their defensive line is always very strong, but undisciplined in their ability to just look to their left and right and see if the running back is going to pass them. They're just so much in sack mode that they aren't really what they're supposed to be, which is also that first line of defense against a running back.
Yeah, I honestly attribute that to not so much the individual player's talent as the scheme, and then the lack of talent behind the defensive line, because the Bengals will put 5 guys across the line of scrimmage, and there's just no gap control. Geno Atkins, he just can't be in every gap. So it's tough. You would think that defensive line could be more active against the run. I don't know if I'm quite a savvy enough analyst to give a more thorough explanation of it, but the one thing I have noticed is that in the Bengals formations, it's almost like 5 guys across the line and then one terrible linebacker behind them that is supposed to make the tackle. That's how the Steelers did it for years. You have a bunch of guys absorb blocks and then the linebacker makes a tackle.
It's kind of the Browns do it, yeah.
Yeah, and if you have Joe Schobert, it works. And if you have Nick Vigil,
not necessarily. Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe they do change their scheme or something, but they also don't get a ton of sacks. So I think it's just they're asking too much from not enough.
Yeah.
Last in the league.
Yeah.
What do you guys think of Finley?
It's hard because you got to say well, he's a rookie, so he's got to develop and stuff. But I don't think that the Raiders' offense is really defense is anything that's really that exciting. So the fact that he wasn't, I guess, more opportunistic is a little bit disappointing. But I mean, he's still got time to develop. Apparently, the last article I just read said that they're going to stick with him, and the exact quote is at least for the next game is what they're saying, which is at this point, why even make it a point of contention? Just see what he's got against the rest of the teams that he plays against. If he, not so much is how he played today, but how does he play the next game or continue to potentially improve? That's what you want. Throwing back in Andy Dalton at this point does nothing except get some guy off the roof, right?
Maybe. I mean,
yeah, maybe.
It didn't the first 2 months of the season. Yeah, I mean, I am always preaching patience with young quarterbacks. I try to. I mean, he's a rookie, and I think if you view him through the scope of what Andy Dalton was able to accomplish this year, which I mean was a lot of yards, at least in the beginning of the year, but I mean he wasn't impressing anybody either, I don't think, this year. So
yeah,
and he's a 12-year veteran or whatever the hell, however long he's been in the league. So I'd say incomplete on Ryan Finley.
He did a couple things that I liked. We talked in the preview podcast about kind of what we knew about Finley and what we wanted to see out of him. A lot of young quarterbacks are unwilling to throw into tight NFL windows, and I think after 2 starts, you're already seeing Finley do it. He tried to throw a couple nice little back shoulders to Auden Tate. Might have thrown a hospital ball to Auden Tate that got him hurt on a post route, but he's still trying to squeeze it in there. I actually think a comparison of Finley and Mason Rudolph is really interesting right now. They both seem to have the same tendencies of being very conservative. They both get a little bit of happy feet in the pocket and maybe even roll themselves into pressure sometimes, trying to find like a clean spot to throw from. Finley's definitely more athletic than Mason, which helps him out a lot. But I liked his aggressiveness. It didn't pan out, and I don't think he always made his reads really well in this game. But I liked his willingness to try and make those throws, and I think it bodes well for him to show some growth in the next few weeks.
Yeah. So before we get off the Bengals on Twitch, I don't know. You're probably like gonna murder your name, but Tufel, Tufel, I don't know, whatever. Said, where's the Browns representation on the podcast? I'm sorry, the Bengals representation on the podcast, which we've talked about. Look, if there is a Bengals fan out there that knows something about football and wants to talk with us, hey man, open invitation. But there's not very many of those out there. And as Joey said, I said, there's like 10 of those people out there. And Joey said, and one of them is stuck on a roof right now. So, yeah, probably getting shipped Skyline chili or something, but I don't know. Ugh. Anyways, let's move on. That's enough for the Bengals. Let's talk about the Ravens and the Texans to close this out. Joey, what you got, bro?
Oh boy. I think this score is a little bit deceptive. This was a 0-0 game at the end of the first quarter, and pretty close for a good little while. Obviously, the big turning point in the beginning of the game was a non-call pass interference on DeAndre Hopkins. The Texans were poised to score first, and Marlon Humphrey seemingly purposely interfered with DeAndre Hopkins to save a touchdown, because that's what you do when you're beat deep by one of the best receivers in the league, and it didn't get called. And so Bill O'Brien is our dunce of the week because he challenged pass interference again, and as egregious as it seems, it still doesn't get overturned.
That's so insane, man. So crazy.
It's just one of these things. 5 years ago, all the coaches and everybody was saying, I don't know what a catch is anymore. And Bill O'Brien said after the game, I don't know what pass interference is anymore.
Yeah. But
how could he?
Yeah, but that did lead to a lot of changes in the catch rule, where I think that the catch rule is like pretty decent right now. I think it's in a good spot.
They've gone back on it.
Right.
They've tried to make it more of more simplified and less technical, and just like but I part of me is starting to lead down the road with this pass interference shit of like conspiracy stuff. Like the NFL made this rule just to shut up Sean Payton and the Saints, and they just decided that they're going to show everyone how stupid the rule is by never ever using it ever.
Do you think that is a momentum changer for the game at all, or no?
A little bit. It's certainly not a 34-point
deficit
swing.
Yeah.
Now, the Texans got basically outclassed, I feel like, in this game.
Right.
Once the Ravens offense got rolling, that was it. And it became clear pretty quickly that the Ravens were able to cover these guys. So the Ravens scored on, I think it was 3 consecutive drives. The last 2 of the first half and the first one of the second half. And it was 21-0 or 21-3, maybe 21-0. And that was it. With the way that the coverage was playing, it was very obvious there was no coming back. The Ravens had like 4 or 5 sacks in the first half, and a lot of them were coverage sacks. We've talked about the shortcomings of the Ravens front seven, and they weren't. And the numbers look great, but they weren't much different in this game. Matthew Judon had a sack the strip sack that he had occurred 10.3 seconds after the snap. So Deshaun was back there, and credit to Matthew Judon for an incredible effort play, because I don't know if it was the strip sack. He had another sack also where Deshaun, basically they're playing like when you're kids and you're playing tag and you get to the coffee table and you're like playing around the coffee table. Like basically Deshaun was doing that with Matthew Judon around the tackle to try to buy himself more time over and over again. Mm-hmm. And it still didn't work because nobody could come uncovered. And that's just what this Ravens defense has to be. I think it's why when possible, Don Martindale trots out as many DBs as he can. It's the strength of this Ravens defense, and it helps them cover up some of their other weaknesses.
Yeah, Deli Fresh on Facebook said that the Ravens defense is crazy, though. And, it's one of those things that's like characteristic of a Ravens defense, but has been very uncharacteristic of them so far this season. So, Joey, I don't know how you want to comment on that, but, but how do you think they kind of turned it around this game?
Recently, I don't think they have been uncharacteristic. So the Marcus Peters trade is kind of the
Minkah Fitzpatrick
already being the turning point for the defense this year. They got Peters back against Seattle, and then they got Jimmy Smith back against the Pats. And those two additions to an already pretty strong unit made it basically elite. Since the Marcus Peters trade, the Ravens defense have the highest pressure percentage in the NFL for a pretty weak defensive front. That is basically all credit to the secondary and Wink Martindale, because the game plan against the Pats was to dial up the blitz over and over and over again. And they forced the second lowest passer rating. And everybody's been dumping on the Ravens because it's been, it was the Dolphins, and it was the Bengals, this and that. They have forced the second lowest passer rating in the league their last 3 weeks, the last 3 games they've played, and those were against Russell Wilson, Tom Brady, and Deshaun Watson.
Yeah.
So I'm tired of hearing everybody's, even when they beat the Patriots, the narrative is, the Patriots are probably still a better team, and this and that. Like, I'm done listening to everybody else's excuses. This Ravens team is a legit Super Bowl contender. Once the Ravens got rolling, they dominated the game on the ground. Lamar looked efficient in the passing game, and whether it's a knock on him that he doesn't fit the ball into tight windows, he's not really asked to fit the ball into tight windows in this offense. The Texans came into the game as the 3rd ranked rush defense in the league and left as the 13th ranked rush defense in the league in one game.
Yeah. After
10 games of compiling stats. So the Ravens dismantled the Texans. It was in Baltimore, and I think that plays a role in it. But Deshaun Watson looked to basically give up eventually in this football game, and there wasn't much he could do.
Yeah, dejected is an easy way to say.
Yeah,
Joey, at this point, seeing what you've seen out of your team, what would you consider a successful season for this team?
Super Bowl appearance.
I agree.
Yeah. Deli Fresh on Facebook said Ravens Seahawks Super Bowl. Oof.
Obviously, making it there and losing has its own ramifications historically, with Super Bowl hangovers and everybody getting paid and all the things that happen with that when you're not the Patriots. But I think at this point, having beat the Pats, having beat the Seahawks, beat Deshaun Watson, I'd be confident if they played the Chiefs again right now. I think an AFC Championship game appearance is a disappointment if that's where the road ends for the Ravens this year.
I agree. Now, I told you a little before the podcast that I was going to have to do this to you, and I wanted to make sure that I complimented where I think this team is overall before I do it. I'm not saying that I guarantee that this will happen, but I think that the flaws in the Ravens offense are still very much there and very much visible. If you look at the early stages of this game, which we all have said, it started 0-0 through the first quarter. It was, 14-0 when the Ravens got a pass interference penalty that put them right up there, and then they basically put it out of reach at 21-0 on a busted coverage Mark Ingram swing pass, which not asking a lot out of your quarterback to throw a swing pass. Mason Rudolph does it like 25 times a game. So what I saw, and I didn't expect this. I almost didn't watch this game again because I saw the scores on Red Zone, and it was such a domination that I wasn't even going to go back. But Lamar, fortunately, is not asked to make NFL-level throws almost ever. And if you really watch, he really doesn't make them. Like when he's asked to throw between a cornerback trailing a receiver and the sideline, he throws it high and out of bounds. When he has to throw between a safety and a linebacker in his zone, he struggles. Even on his first touchdown pass to Roberts, which I thought looked really good at first, he made a nice read and threw it high and kind of away from the defender, but he was totally behind his receiver. Like a savvy defender could have disrupted that play. I thought his second touchdown pass on like the skinny post to Mark Andrews, that was a really nice throw and a good read, but he stared him down the whole time. So like a really savvy safety might pick that off. I think if you're trying to coach up your defense to defend this team, you are doing everything in your inventive power to get Lamar Jackson throwing the ball, because every single long Ravens drive involves a Lamar Jackson highlight run. It just does. They're not doing much of anything. They're kind of squeaking a first down here or there. And then he just runs for 40 yards. Like he just does it. Now, here's some acknowledgement. I'm going to acknowledge that he just does that every time, and no one up to this point has been able to stop it. And that's why I think they should expect to go to the Super Bowl. That being said, anyone that comes up with the clever thing that ups this offense for a quarter, 2 quarters a game, trouble's brewing. Trouble is brewing for this offense if they can make him throw to win, especially if they have a well-coached and disciplined secondary that can create small windows for him to hit, because he has read the zone pretty successfully. Someone can do it. I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think
Maybe.
the word that I wanted to say when you started this your whole spiel was exploitable. I think that it has the potential to be exploitable. It's just nobody's figured it out yet, I guess. I don't know.
See, but for me, the difference, so there's 2 things. The offense itself is still evolving. They're still showing new things every week. They ran a play action pass play with 3 tight ends, which is crazy. And all 3 tight ends are legitimate, respectable pass catchers at this point. With Hayden Hurst has come along pretty nicely this year. And I do think still that Lamar transcends strategy, because like we've said time and time again, we haven't seen anybody except for Josh Topu or whatever catch him.
Open field tackler.
Yeah, we haven't seen people touch him, which is insane. So that's one of the things that I'm resting on a little bit right now. But I have faith in Greg Roman, and I think that Lamar will continue to improve. I think he earnestly seeks improvement. John Harbaugh says that he believes that Lamar Jackson's the type of guy that does everything in his power to not make the same mistake twice. And we can talk about the inaccuracies and things like that. That's not what I would consider a mistake necessarily. It's just something that he has to work on. But I mean, yeah, I'm super high on this Ravens win. I was expecting a close game.
Yeah.
And it was close for a little while, but I mean, once that ball gets rolling and you get to the point where you have to pass, and it's how they beat the Pats. They got up on them a couple scores. You know, once you have to pass on this defense, you're in deep water.
Yeah, it's almost like in order to beat the Ravens, you almost need the Ravens secondary. But they have their own secondary.
And you know, you have to pass, and then if you have a drive stall and then you punt, and then the Ravens put together this methodical 12-play 8-minute drive and score again, and it's like, fuck. I mean, that's what happened to the Pats. You know, you just see Tom Brady's been sitting on the sideline for 20 minutes of real time, just waiting, looking
They're a good team,
butt hurt.
I think that
it'll be exciting.
We're going to start to turn into a Baltimore Ravens podcast here pretty quick if we want to keep talking about our own team.
Yeah, at least in January. Yeah.
Come January. Yeah.
We'll see. Plot twist. The Ravens lose every game from here on out, and the Browns win every game from here on out in a complete upset. Anyways, that's NFL Week 11. I think we've talked enough. We're going pretty heavy on time. So, yeah. That's week 11.
Players
let's
of the
talk.
week.
Yeah, I was just about to say, let's talk about some player of the week type stuff.
CJ said we're torturing him with the Ravens worshiping.
Let's talk about offensive players of the week. You guys got something?
Do I got something?
Yeah, it's just the weekly Lamar Jackson Bowl, you know?
No.
Okay, what's up?
I'm going to surprise you.
All right.
While I think Lamar Jackson is certainly worthy, he posted 139 QBR and had 9.6 yards a carry. Mark Ingram is also deserving. He had 2 receiving touchdowns.
Mm-hmm.
But Gus Edwards,
the Gus Bus,
the backup running back. I won't do that live to Chad's face.
That's because it's not a term that exists. We don't acknowledge it. I don't know who you're talking about.
It gets used basically every game by the announced team at this point. And I think about you every time.
Nice.
Gus Edwards had 8 carries for 112 yards and really had the run that was like, oh, this like broke the morale of the Texans, the 63-yard big touchdown run. So he's my nominee just because it's the same thing where like Jordan was so dominant for so long that the voters got fatigue and were like, oh, we'll just vote for someone else. That's what this is. I'm tired of Lamar Jackson crushing his foes, crushing his enemies, and seeing them driven before him and hearing the lamentations of their women. So Gus Edwards is my nominee this week.
Justin, would you like to make a nomination? Since obviously I'm not going to make a Steeler nomination, but I do have players. I'm prepared.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, one of my players was
We normally
Gus
do left or right
Edwards.
anyways, but
I do like Gus Edwards as a nomination. He was my honorable mention. I actually thought that the Ravens' run game was inconsistent. Mark Ingram was successful on swing passes. He had one highlight tackle break and one that he just got ignored and ran in and waved at people. But Gus Edwards was the backbreaker. He had the 60-yard touchdown, but every one of his runs felt like a success. It felt like he was running for a first down, breaking tackles, going in between people. So I like that nomination, Joey, especially since Lamar was just throwing swing passes and easy crossing routes all game to nobody that was even guarded.
To 4 touchdowns and no interceptions and 139
Sure.
QBR.
Sure. If you throw a swing pass and nobody's guarding your running back, like, you're going to look really good. I'm going to nominate Baker Mayfield. I honestly think he had his best game. Statistically, it's not going to blow your skirt up, but he had 2 touchdowns, and his pocket, we've been criticizing Baker's ability to navigate the pocket all year. He did what everybody wanted him to do, which was take the first read when it was there. But he also did what he wanted to do, which was extend the play and make a big play when he could. And he did it successfully this time. This is what reminded us of the guy that we saw last year when he was winning games. Again, a little excited about the Browns. And this is against a defensive front that is on pace to have like 50 to 60 sacks this year. So they were coming after him, and he was playing his best football. So Baker Mayfield, I think, starting a rivalry up again with some great play.
Yeah, so I'll give an honorable mention to the Bengals, because we haven't really given a lot of love to the Bengals lately. So Joe Mixon is going to get my nomination. 5.73 yards per carry on 15 rushes, right? So that's 86 total yards. He had a touchdown. He had another 17 yards on top of that. So I think that's total over 100 yards from scrimmage.
And that touchdown was all him.
Right.
Yeah.
Fucking nobody was blocked on that touchdown.
Right. So, I'll give it to Joe Mixon probably as an honorable mention, but we'll see kind of how that swings in the polls. We had a recommendation from Twitch for Lamar, which is pretty clear, but yeah, we've had Lamar fatigue on the podcast. We've been nominating Lamar like pretty much every week, and he's just been dominating. So
Dude, he wasn't himself this week. He was just plodding along, doing whatever. He had one pretty good run for him, which was obviously an electric run for anybody else, but for him, it won't even make the year highlight reel.
Yeah, John Harbaugh said, we don't see runs like that in the NFL. And then he said, well, except for last week.
Yeah, so Joe Mixon, I guess that's my honorable mention for having a pretty good game this week. Let's talk about defensive players of the week. I think you guys already know what I'm going to say. All right. Look, Joseph Schobert. Joseph Emmereffin Schobert. All right, look, 2 interceptions this game, played like a fucking monster, had 7 solo tackles. I need to check, so while you guys defer on who's going to lose against Joe Schobert this week, I'm going to figure out, but I think he's still like number 4 in total tackles this season.
Well, I've got a challenger for the... Oh, go ahead, Chad.
I'm going to go because obviously I had a lot of skin in this game, and out of respect...
He's still number 4.
For our podcast and this process and what I saw in the Steeler game, I made 1 nomination, no honorable mention, and I didn't even look up statistics. I wrote down Joe Schobert. He was omnipresent everywhere. He was just everywhere. He's the defensive player of the week.
You know who else had 7 solo tackles this week, Justin?
What's up?
Matthew Judon.
Ooh.
Who, in my opinion, had his best game as a pro. I think we all remember the game last year against the Titans where everybody on the Ravens had like 7 sacks apiece.
Yeah.
I still think this was his best game. He had to chase around Deshaun Watson all game long. He had to be relentless. For those Ravens fans out there, depending on your age, you may or may not remember one Michael McCrary. He wore number 99. He was a terror of a defensive end, and he was known for his motor. Matthew Judon, Mr. Body Built by Taco Bell, did not quit in this football game. He ended up with 7 tackles, 2 sacks, 3 tackles for a loss, a forced fumble. He was everywhere, and he was relentless, and I would like to reward him for his efforts.
Do not reward him, fans, because his first sack, he was entirely unblocked. So, congratulations, Judon, for nothing. And his second sack, he just won an endurance award because Deshaun Watson is too dumb to throw the ball away. So, you know what, Judon? Congratulations on your best game. Second place.
Yeah, man. So, like I said, 7 solo. He also had 2 QB hits. He had 2 interceptions and was responsible for a fumble that was recovered by the Steelers, but for some reason it's not on the stat line, even though it was recovered by the Steelers. But him and Miles both kind of contributed to it. He's actually...
so Miles got the forced fumble.
I looked and Miles didn't get it either, so I don't know what happened with it. But what was I going to say? Yeah, so I guess overall kind of a thing, since I'm always on the Joe Schobert train. He's number 2 in the league right now for total tackles. And he's, I think, making himself another potential Pro Bowl run this season. But we'll see. All right, guys.
And they're having a baby, him and his wife. They announced after the game.
Congratulations to the Schoberts.
The Schoberts are a fun follow on social media if you're into Twitter and some of that stuff.
Yeah. Did you see the one where it was like his wife like accidentally cut herself with a knife? And it was like this like little shallow cut or whatever. And she's like, oh man, I just cut myself with a knife, blah, blah, blah. And he like goes and picks up the knife and he's just like, man, I should get these things sharpened or whatever. I don't know. It was funny. I guess it needs to be in context.
Sounds hilarious.
Shut up. It sounds like they're just as lame as everyone else on social media.
But they put out some commentary about it. Anyways, that's pretty much it for this entire week, to include Players of the Week. Be sure to vote in the polls for Players of the Week. We put those polls on Facebook. Joey, we putting those on Twitters too? Twitters. What the fuck am I, like 60?
No, I haven't been. Okay,
but they are on Facebook, so be sure to vote in the polls for Player of the Week. We haven't put those up on the Facebook. So that'll be fun. We'll read those results. We'll talk about them. I wanted to mention that for the polls for the preview, from the preview podcast, y'all were fucking down and out on the Browns. All right, it was like 23 to 77% for the Steelers. And, well, you know, I'm just going to say maybe, I don't know. I would love to see the Browns sweep the division this year. That would be so fucking glorious. And I think that it's possible. Let me just say that. It's possible.
It would be pretty Cleveland to sweep the division and still lose.
Yeah, I mean,
sweep the division and go 7-9.
Yeah. What were you gonna say?
It's almost worth losing the next time.
Right. But anyways, for those of you that stopped by this podcast, we had a couple interactions, so thank you. We appreciate that. Lively, yeah. Feel free to stop by again in the future. Again, every week, Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9:30 p.m. Eastern. Check us out. We do live streams on Facebook, on Twitch, and on YouTube. And if you cannot catch us live, fret not. We are on pretty much anywhere that you can get a podcast. So if you can find a podcast, you can most likely find us. So look for us there. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your community leaders, whatever. I don't know. But come hang out with the podcast and talk with us about the AFC North and what you guys think. Listen to what we think, and we can kind of make a conversation out of it. But
tune in Thursday, because I'm going to have to tell you who's on the Steelers team after all the concussions we suffered last week. So
yeah.
If you want to know who's on the team, I'm going to help.
Yeah.
Hines Ward, Plaxico Burress.
Everybody.
Yeah, bring them all back.
Bringing them back.
All right, everybody. Thanks for stopping by. We'll see you guys Thursday, 9:30 p.m. Eastern. Take it easy.